Welcome, Baruch.
Oh, I just want to mention I might have to leave early because I have my trainer coming in earlier.
Okay,
So if I disappear, it's you know why.
we'll take it personally.
Yeah,
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kijanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Maine.
Amen.
So as you see, of course, this week, it's always the Shabbat that precedes Tisha B'Av. We are into Devarim. We're into Devarim, and we've gotten to chapter 2, somewhat into chapter 2, and basically, of course, what is happening is Moses is reviewing the past history. This is, just to review for a moment. The situation is that Moses is in pretty much, I think, the last month of his life, and he has a series of three speeches he gives to the Jewish people. It's like his last will and testament. And here at these first early chapters, quite a few chapters actually, he goes over to review the history of the people with him, essentially to try to teach them to learn from the mistakes they've made. And I think as I've been reflecting on these things, appreciation, which I've mentioned before, of course, is such a fundamental value. And I think what's happened is I've sort of thought of it in a different kind of way as a rationale for keeping mitzvot. That is to say that if you in fact believe in a divine creator, and if in fact you believe that this vast universe in its most minute, from its microcosmic elements to its macrocosmic elements, including the amazing wonders of the human body and the ability to think, etc., that these all have a divine source, and that in reflecting on this, one is filled with a sense of appreciation and gratitude to one's creator. If this fills your heart, fills your mind, fills your consciousness, the next stage is to ask yourself, this is assuming, and this is the Elohim part, of course, that there is a direct connection between the creator and the created. That the question becomes, how do you express this appreciation? How do you express what is called in the Shema, the love that you have, but this intense appreciation you have for the one who made this all possible? And that is ultimately the rationalization, or the rationale, I should say, for performing mitzvot. To see mitzvot as an incredible way of expressing your life as an appreciation to your creator. And the fact that we are given these mitzvot, that it isn't up to us and for us to determine what is an appropriate expression of appreciation, but that we have this Torah that essentially maps out for us the way in which to express every moment of our lives as an expression of appreciation to our divine. And this to me is the ultimate rationale for keeping mitzvot such as kashrut, which don't necessarily have any scientific support for them, but simply as a way of saying thank you, thank you. And of course, the implications of this are very deep because instead of necessarily looking at all the adversity that life inevitably throws to us, we start to enjoy life, knowing that we can do this, that we can accomplish this, and that there is such a feeling of significance, a feeling of purpose, etc., in this particular way, which we know in expressing our thanks to God, it involves also expressing our appreciation for this creation, for God's creation, recognizing that we are, so to speak, renting space and time here, and that as renters, we need to take care of the property over which we have any jurisdiction. So treating other people, treating creation, treating the world, etc. These are all things that are bound up with what starts with this awareness that there's something that makes all of this possible. And also, one other thing I think that's very important is that there are, in fact, deep, one doesn't want to call them rewards, but they are rewards uh, for being able to live your life in this way. And perhaps not only does it allow you to live out your every single day with a sense of joy, but also the idea that there is something beyond this life, that recognizing how brief this life is, and yet knowing that in living life in this particular kind of way, there's something to look forward to even after we pass on and finish our rental agreement here in this world. And I think this is all bound up in the Torah. And I think that's part of perhaps understanding Deuteronomy in Moses's last will and testament for the Jewish people, speaking out through the years, through the centuries, through the millennia, even to this day, to this very day. I think that we've studied enough together to see to what degree human nature is human nature and how to what degree, uh, if we understand these particular principles, the Torah can really be a source of joy and blessing to us. So, going on now to the text itself. So Moses is talking about the wanderings and what happened as they got to the edges of the land of Canaan. And this is a message, we got this in the middle of a statement where he says, how Eshlach malachim midbar kedemot. I sent messengers from Midbar. Kedemot actually means earlier times, but I think there is a name. It sounds to me like it is actually a name of a wilderness. Here's the point: El Sihon, to Sihon, Melech Heshbon, the king of Heshbon, Divrei Shalom Lemor, speaking words of peace, saying, quote, right, Ebra ba'artzecha, let me pass through your land, baderech elech, I will stick strictly to the way, to the path, lo asur yamim usnol, I will not turn to the right or the left. Ochel bekesef tashbireni, food you will sell to me, va'achalti, at which point I will then be able to consume it, but only after I pay for it. Umayim bakesef titenli v'shatiti, and water you will give me for money, right, for silver literally, right, and I will drink. Raksa really trying to say, I'm not interested in taking over here. Rak Ebra Brakalai. I will only pass through with my, on foot. So, Ka'asher Asuli. So remember, he's telling the Jewish people what actually happened. So, Ka'asher Asuli Bnei Esav, but this is a continuing, right? Saying, there's a continuation of his statement to Sihon. Just please do this, Ka'asher Asuli Bnei Esav, just as the children of Esau, Hayoshvim b'Seir, who dwell in Seir, Vahamuavim, and the Moabites, just as they did, right? So it's not like I'm asking you to do something completely different. I've passed I've had to encounter these other two nations, and Hayoshvim Ba'ar, the Moabites who dwell in Ar, the capital city, Ad Asher Evor et Hayarden, up until I pass through the Jordan, over the Jordan, El Haaretz, into the land, Asher Hashem Elokeinu Noten Lanu, which the Lord our God gives us. Now, the Rashi is going to comment on this, and the reason is because we know that the Moabites and the Edomites, that's the children of Esau, the Edomites, refused to let them go through their land. They did not allow them to go through. And so Rashi tells us, right, there were a few things that Moses requested of Sihon. And so Rashi says, Ka'asher asuli b'nei Esav, just as the children of Esau did for me. In other words, sounding like that they allowed them to pass through and allowed and sold them food and drink and water, right? And Rashi points out, Lo le'inyan avur ba'artzam. It wasn't the fact that they allowed them to go through their land because they didn't. They didn't. Ela le'inyan mecher ochel umayim. But what it's saying is that what Esau and Moab did allow was to sell them. They did sell them food and water. So, but that's what Moses was saying. Okay. He wasn't trying to suggest that they did, that when it came to what Moab and Esau did was to let them pass through. But at least they sold them food and water. They did that. But he was hoping the new thing was to let them get through, to pass through the Amorite territory. Ad asher until I pass over the Jordan, right? Cross over the Jordan. Musav al Ebrach. So that is in other words, let me pass through your land until I cross the Jordan and sell me food and drink. And I will not go away from the main road, from the high road. I'm just going to do that. Okay. So here we go. Velo ava Sichon melech Heshbon ha'avirenu bo. But Sihon, the king of Heshbon, did not desire to allow us to pass through. Why? Here we go. Ki hiksha Hashem Elokecha et rucho, because the Lord your God hardened his spirit, v'imetz et levavo, and strengthened his heart, encouraged his heart, Leman tito be'elcha k'yom hazeh, in order to give him into your power like today, into your hand as it is today. Now, theologically, of course, this also raises, the same kinds of issues that the whole issue of hardening Pharaoh's heart. I mean, this is like a recollection of this. And, trying to work through these ideas, I think it involves having a great deal of faith in God's justice, right? That that we would have to simply assume that God had a reason for pushing Sihon to behave in this way. And again, trying to reflect on what is Moses trying to communicate? What is the Torah trying to communicate? Is the Torah saying that on some levels Sihon should have had no problem, right? What was the problem he had with allowing the Israelites to go through, to pass through on the terms that they offered, right? And for whatever reason, possibly based on Sihon's life to that point and the life of those Amorites at that particular point, this was not going to happen. That the fact that Sihon made this decision was actually a divine thing. Now that's one possibility. Another possibility is telling the Israelites that despite the fact that they were going to have to engage in battle, and who wants to have to do that? I mean, they stated what they wanted to do. They never got to do what they wanted to do. They were forced to, Sihon came out and attacked them, came forward and attacked them. It wasn't just that he said, no, you can't go through, period, that's it, nothing doing. He actually came to attack them. And that to look at that rather as a divine blessing rather than as a punishment of some kind. And that could really be the message that Moses was trying to give them at this time. And not so much a theological rationalization for why Sihon did what he did, but rather to express an idea that whatever God does is ultimately for the best. Right. Yeah. I mean, God is obviously has a relationship with the entire universe, has a relationship with nations other than the Jewish people. We may have a unique relationship, but we don't have a soul relationship, right? And that may be actually what Moses was trying to say, because clearly having to do battle with Sihon was going to involve danger and they certainly could say, God, why couldn't you have just let us go through? It's a very reasonable request, etc. Pretty much. So just some thoughts. Obviously, I am not covering all that might be considered in this regard, but I actually do think this is the main reason that that Moses said what he said, and that the Torah is saying what it says. Vayomer Hashem Elai. So God said to me, Re'eh, see, Hachiloti tet lefanecha, I have actually begun to give before you. So here's another thought. The fact that it says Hachiloti, I've begun, right? So here, even under Moses, even though Moses himself, at this point, he knows he's not going to be going in with the Jewish people, but that they should experience, that the Israelites should experience at this point, the fact that they were going to be successful in conquering the land of Canaan, that they already had a taste of victory even before Moses died. And that possibly that's another, again, looking always at this from a literary perspective as to what literary values are coming out of this particular situation here, right? So, Sihon ve'et atzor, and his land. Hachel reish la reshit atzor. Go ahead, right? Hachiloti, hachel, begin to take over La Reshet, right? Et Arzo, his land. So again, had Sichon not done this, the Israelites would not have been entitled to their territory. But because Sichon went ahead and did that and attacked them, it wound up, well, what happened? Their land became Israelite territory. Hachiloti tet lefanecha. And interesting, right? So Rashi takes a midrash that's a description of the dynamics, sort of the emotional dynamics going on. So what's this? Ki pasar shel Amoraim, or a kafar sar. Basically it means I don't want to say imprisoned, but like shackled, right? Totally put under the Sar Shel Amorim. So there is this thought, this sort of theory that just as every individual has a guardian angel, so nations have guardian angels. Again, this is using language in a very sort of suggestive kind of way to say that there are powers that may be identifiable, that represent the way a nation behaves, and that in that when you look at the general way in which a nation behaves, and sort of put up, as it were, to make a person out of it, right? To describe that. And I'm sorry because I'm blocking on the English term for it. There's a term for doing that. I don't think it's personification, but regardless, it's trying to express things in terms of the aggregate and combined cultural nature of a particular people, right? And I think that's how it's doing it, and saying that there is an effect, right? How our future lies before us has so much to do with the aggregate force of how a nation behaves. And here in this case, using sort of this literary device, saying that God put this guardian angel of the Amorites, right? Emorim shel Mala, right? It's upper shel Malas, this angel that was on high, Tachat Raglav shel Moshe, under the legs, under the feet of Moses. In other words, again, trying to describe uh, the degree to which this was a privilege to the Jewish people. V'hadrichu al tzavaro. And Moses, or he caused Moses to be able to press down on his neck, on the neck of this particular angel. So we need to understand, try to see this as a very sort of subtle way of trying to describe some dynamics, some I don't know if you want to call them social dynamics, emotional dynamics, spiritual dynamics, as to what was going on here. But the whole idea that the Israelites would be able to overpower the Amorites, and you could apply that to what happened in the establishment of the state of Israel, even in 1948, because when all these Arab countries joined together to destroy and wipe out Israel at that particular point, and how that didn't happen. It wasn't something that happened. We're not talking here about righteousness or justifications or things like that. We're talking about something that, on a level, is miraculous. So, and perhaps also, again, to what degree does one have to be grateful for this ability and also to be magnanimous in victory? I think that is so important, right? You want to be magnanimous when you're victorious. And for the people that, in this case, that's what I think. Here, of course, it's not the case. They certainly weren't magnanimous to the Amorites, but the situation wasn't necessarily the same as it was in 1948, and it's simply a position that I have there. I know for a fact that that the reason why World War II didn't become World War III as World War I became World War II was because the American the Allied forces were magnanimous to the conquered. So going on. Um, Here we go. So he now describes what Sihon did. Vayetze Sihon. By the way, I could say something else too. That the fact that the Torah is saying this is saying not to assume that the Amorite territory was, in fact, to become Israelite territory. It was outside the boundaries of the land of Canaan as originally envisioned. And so this was a new circumstance. And so the idea of having divine permission to do that is, as the statement is, as the sentence is saying, was very, very important. So, Vayetze Sichon likratenu, Sihon came out, right, to meet us, to encounter us. Who? He, the Chol Amo, and his entire people, Lemilchama yochza, to yochats, to wage war against us. Let's see if there's a beginning of Rashi here. Vayetze Sichon. So it's talking about how Sichon's intention was to destroy the Israelites. Now, I have to say that there is also a tradition uh, that the Amorites were Sihon and Og, right? We know also about Og, that both the Amorites and Og and his nation, I'm not sure if they were Amorites as well. There was an agreement on the part of all the nations who had heard what the Israelites were doing in their march towards the land of Canaan, that Sihon and Og were to protect. They were obviously located on the boundaries where the Israelites were going to enter, and that there was an agreement that they were to defend the Canaanites. So it's not mentioned here. It is suggested in terms of right before the story of Bilam and Balak, etc., and why Balak chose to try cursing them instead of waging war with them. That's actually that they were in that position. So that would be a reason why Sihon did what he did. But again, he had a choice. He had a choice. Okay. So there's obviously give and take here. So Vayetze Sihon. Sihon went out. Lo shalach bishvil. Okay. So let's make sure. In other words, lo shalach bishvil og azor lo. Right. So the question is, why didn't he unite? Right? Why didn't he call on Og to allow himself to battle against the Israelites? Why did he do that? Why did he just go by himself? In other words, it's understanding Vayetze Sichon as making a point that Sichon went out, putting the accent on or the emphasis on Sichon. In other words, Sichon came out to do it, and didn't choose to come along with Og because both of them were going to attack the Israelites. So the question is why here that Rashi is pointing out is why didn't Sihon call on Og to help him, to aid him? L'lamedcha, to teach you, shelo hayu tzrichim zeh lazeh, the fact that they were both considered so powerful as individual nations that they didn't need one another. Right. So again, trying to describe the nature of the miracle in the sense that the Israelites were able to accomplish what they accomplished. Okay. Vayitnehu Hashem Eloheinu lefanenu. And look at this. And the Lord gave him, right, or gave them to, the Lord our God gave them before us. V'nach oto, and we smote him, ve'et banav. Now, notice it's spelt, this is a kri, so we're supposed to read it as banav, his sons, even though it's spelled beno, his son, right? Ve'et kolamo, and his entire nation. Right? So, again, giving credit not to the Israelites' ability to fight, but rather the fact that in some ways these particular events they don't necessarily simply follow a logical, who's the stronger army, etc. There are lots of different factors that go into one army conquering another army. So giving God the gratitude and the appreciation there. So Rashi, ve'et banav, right, and his sons. Beno kativ, but he's saying, Rashi's saying, it's written as Beno, as his son. Shahaya lo ben gibor kamohu. That is because Sihon had a son who was powerful, just like he was. And we'll stop here today. Right now section. Sorry, let's go into here. Apology. Ooh. Okay, let's see if I got that. And I'm gonna stop the share. And any comments before we end for today? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.